Good morning, Baker Babes. Welcome back to my back patio. It's so beautiful out today, and it's so a little cool, so it's not too hot right now. I think today might be one of those days you might even be able to break out like some water games or something. Well, I thought you might enjoy a little bit of a little pig-a-wiggle before we go off for the weekend. We got to read to find out what she does about this bully. Let's go ahead and read, and we'll see how that goes. Maybe we'll even find out about another challenge that she has. Mrs. Semicolon looked around her and sighed. She wondered if she shouldn't forget what Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle had said and have old Mac, the handyman, clean up the place. Then she heard the phone ringing, and it was Mr. Semicolon wanting to know if she had gotten a hold of Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and what she had said, and she had just finished talking to him when Roscoe's mother called to say that the doctor said that he was just bruised. And then by the time she had tidied up the house and had a sandwich, it was 3:30 and almost time for Nikki to come home from school. She fixed a plate of sugar cookies and a glass of milk and a big shiny red apple and put them on the kitchen table. Then she went upstairs and washed her face and combed her hair and put on her grocery store skirt and sweater. She was just finishing her shopping list when she heard a commotion out in the street. She ran to the front window just in time to see Nicky lift his geography book high over his head and bring it down, clunk, on the skinny little 8-year-old back of Sylvia Crouch. Quickly, Mrs. Semicolon rapped on her window and called out, "Nicky, Semicolon, stop that! Stop that this minute!" Nicky glanced at his mother and then lifted the book up for another blow. Mrs. Semicolon dashed out of the house, grabbed the book, and said, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself? A big boy like you hitting a little girl?" "Well, she started it," Nicky said. "I did not either," Sylvia shrieked. "You took the apple away from my little sister, and you pulled my hair." Mrs. Semicolon said, "Nicholas, give Sylvia back her little sister's apple at once." "I can't," Nicholas said, smiling sheepishly. "I ate it." "All right, then," said his mother. "March right into the kitchen and get the apple I put out for you and give it to Sylvia." Slowly, reluctantly, Nicholas went in and got the apple, but instead of handing it to Sylvia, he threw it at her hard. It hit her in the stomach. "There's your old apple," he said, laughing. Mrs. Semicolon grabbed him by the shoulders and shaking him said, "Nicholas Semicolon, apologize to Sylvia and then go right up to your room at once." Nicholas, not looking at all sorry, said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I guess, but I hope your ugly little sister chokes to death on that apple." Mrs. Semicolon grabbed his arm and hustled him into the house. She was just sending him up to his room when she remembered about Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and the leadership pills. She said, "Go out and get in the car. We're going to the store, and then we're going to stop by Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's for a minute." In the grocery store, Nicholas pushed the basket, and Mrs. Semicolon chose the groceries. They got along very well until Mrs. Semicolon left him and the basket up by the dog foods while she went to the garlic salt. She was on her way back when she heard a child crying. She hurried to where she had left Nicholas and found him pushing his heavy-loaded basket as hard as he could into the almost empty basket of a little boy not more than 6. The little boy was crying. Nicholas was laughing and getting ready to give his heavy basket another mighty shove when a firm hand grabbed him by the collar and sent him spinning into the Mighty Pup dog food. One can of Mighty Pup hit him on the head. Another landed on his toe. Another cracked him on the wrist. "Ouch!" he yelled. "Look out what you're doing." "I know what I'm doing," said his mother. "Now stand up and see if you've broken any of that poor little boy's mommy's eggs." Sulkily, Nicholas got to his feet, limped over, and opened the box of eggs. 3 were cracked. Mrs. Semicolon gave the little boy her box of eggs and took the cracked ones. Then she made Nicholas apologize and with his own allowance buy the little boy a box of animal crackers. She didn't let him out of her sight after that until she got to Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's house. Then she waited in the car while he went in to get the leadership pills. The yard, the front porch, in fact, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's whole house was alive with children. They were swinging, digging, sewing, building, painting, singing, teeter-tottering, all busy and happy until Nicholas opened the gate. The first thing he did was deliberately to bump into and tip over a little boy on a tricycle. Then he stepped on the fingers of a little girl sitting on the steps playing jacks. His mother was glad to see that when he came out of the house with a bottle of pills, the little girl who had been playing jacks hit him with a big stick and then ran in the house and slammed the door. Nicholas started after her, but his mother honked the horn and shouted at him to come to get in the car. "Ivy, little birdie bee." On the way home, she told him how disgracefully he had acted, but he only hummed and smiled and acted very unsorry. She gave him one of the leadership pills even before she unpacked the groceries and sent him up to his room to study his geography and think about his loathsome actions. She also told him to take off his brogues and put on his bedroom slippers. He said, "I like these big new shoes. They kick hard." Well, at dinner that night, even though his mother kept looking at him hopefully, there was not much evidence of leadership on Nicholas's part, unless you can call being the first at the table and eating the most leadership. However, he didn't step on Josephine's tail, and he didn't kick the cat, and he did walk quietly in his bedroom slippers. Mrs. Semicolon was drinking her second cup of coffee when she suddenly remembered poor little Roscoe and the crayons, coloring book, and cookies she had promised him. She called Mrs. Eager to see if Roscoe was still awake, and when she found that he was, she put the things in a basket and was just putting on her coat when Nicholas said, "Let me take the things over, Mother." Knowing how Mrs. Eager felt about him, and also realizing that Mr. Eager, who was noted for his violent temper, was home, she said, "Are you sure you want to?" "Yes," said Nicholas in a strange, quiet voice. "I'll go change my shoes." After he had left with the basket, Mrs. Semicolon said, "Forthright, I'm worried. I know that it's right that Nicky should take those things to Roscoe and apologize, but I'm worried about Hilton Eager. You know what a terrible temper he has. What if he should hit Nicholas? "Serves Nicky right," said Mr. Semicolon unfeelingly. "I suppose you were right," said Mrs. Semicolon in a worried voice. She cleared the table, washed the dinner dishes, fed the cat, fed Josephine, wrote a note to the milkman, and mended a tear in Nicky's play jacket. Nicky still hadn't come home. She and Mr. Semicolon played a game of cribbage. Mrs. Semicolon usually beat him all to pieces, but tonight she was so worried she couldn't count. Finally, Mr. Semicolon said, Come, Carlotta, stop worrying. Nicky's all right." "But what about Hilton Eager and his terrible temper?" Just then, the front door opened and Nicky came in. He was whistling. His mother called out, "How was Roscoe, Nicky?" "Oh, he's okay," said Nicky. "We played a couple of games of darts." "How are his legs?" asked his father. "They're pretty scratched up," said Nicky. "I'm going to ride him to school on my handlebars tomorrow." "Did you apologize to him?" asked his mother. "Yes, I did," said Nicky cheerfully. "He was real nice about it, but his dad gave me an awful bawling out. For a couple of minutes I thought he was going to sock me. Mrs. Eager wouldn't speak to me at all at first, but after I apologized, she made us some cocoa. She's awful nice. I got 2 more pages of geography to do. Good night." Rather self-consciously, he kissed his mother and father, something he hadn't done for weeks. In fact, ever since he had become a big, swaggering bully. The next morning at breakfast, Mrs. Semicolon gave Nicholas another leadership pill. Later, she was pleased to see how carefully he helped Roscoe into the handlebars of his bicycle. "You okay?" When he came home from school, he said, "Say, Mom, those brogues are really too heavy for school. Do you suppose I could have some new patrol shoes?" "I'll ask your father," she said. After he had changed into his play clothes, his mother asked him where he was going, and he said, "I told Sylvia I'd help her patch the tire on her bike." In about a half an hour, he was back with Sylvia, her little sister, and Roscoe. Leaving them outside on the porch, he came in and whispered excitedly to his mother, who was making apple turnovers. "Say, Mom, would you care if I gave my old trike to Sylvia's little sister? Hers is all rusty, and anyway, it's too little, and Sylvia and Roscoe and I are going to paint it up for the baby." "I think that'd be very nice," said Mrs. Semicolon. "Your old tricycle is out in the garden house. Say, that would be a good place to paint the other tricycle. You could put all the garden stuff down in the cellar." "Oh, boy." Nicky hugged his mother so hard he got flour in his hair. "By the way," he said as he went out the door, "I asked the boy in my room to come over and play. His name's Jimmy Gopher. He had to go home and ask his mother. Send him out to the garden house when he comes." Jimmy Gopher, who came streaking up on his bicycle about 10 minutes later, was as big and as strong and as husky as Nicky. He also had red hair and freckles. Mrs. Semicolon was a little worried for fear he and Nicky might not be nice to the smaller children, who now included Sylvia, her little sister, her little brother Roscoe, and the Adams twins, who were only 4, and Priscilla Wick, who was 7. She kept looking out the kitchen window anxiously, but everything seemed to be very peaceful. For a while, they all carried things from the garden house to the cellar, and then Sylvia came in for a broom and a dustpan. Priscilla Wick wanted a pan of water and a cloth to wash the windows. Jimmy Gopher wanted to know where the turpentine was, and Roscoe wanted some steel wool to take the rust off the tricycle. About 4:30, Mrs. Semicolon put 9 apple turnovers on a plate and was about to carry them to the children when she heard a commotion and looked out to see Jimmy Gopher put out his foot and trip Priscilla, who was carrying the pan of water. She fell flat, slopped water all over her play coat, and began to cry. Jimmy laughed uproariously. Hurriedly, Mrs. Semicolon went up to the cupboard to get one of the leadership pills. Picking up the plate of turnovers and the pill, she opened the back door. She couldn't believe her eyes or her ears. Nicky, her own Nicky, the former bully, was helping Priscilla to her feet and wiping her tears. He was also saying sternly to Jimmy, "Listen, Jim, Priscilla's a little littler than you, and she's a girl. Nobody in our club hits girls or little kids. If you want to hit somebody, hit me if you can." Jimmy said sulkily, "Oh, I didn't hurt her. She's just an old baby." Not very nice, is he? "I am not," Priscilla said. "I'm the pitcher on the neighborhood baseball team, but you got my play coat all wet, and I'm going to tell my father, and he'll make mashed potatoes out of you." Sylvia's little sister said, "He will, too. He's big." Mrs. Semicolon said, "How about a hot apple turnover?" "Hot diggity zowie, oh boy," the little children cried as they crowded around her. She gave them each a turnover, but before she gave Jimmy his, she tucked a leadership pill inside the crust. While the children were eating their little pies, she took Priscilla's coat in and put it on the hall radiator to dry, and got one of Nicky's play jackets for her to wear. There was no more trouble, and just before the children had to go home for dinner, Sylvia came excitedly in and asked Mrs. Semicolon to come to the studio and see her little sister's old tricycle, which they had painted a beautiful bright red with silver handlebars and silver spokes on the wheels. The old garden house looked beautiful. The windows were shiny clean. The floor was swept, and Nicky and Jim had made a table out of 2 sawhorses and some old boards. "This is our work table," they told her proudly. Little Roscoe Eager said, "We got a club, Mrs. Semicolon, and we're all members, and it's to fix bicycles and stuff like that." Priscilla said, "We're going to call it the Neighborhood Children's Club." "Nick's the president," Jimmy said, "and I'm the supervisor because I'm awful good at mechanics and fixing things." "I'm the secretary," Sylvia said. "I'm going to keep notes and make lists of the work we have to do." "I'm the treasurer," Priscilla said. "I collect the dues and take the money when we sell lemonade and stuff like that." "I'm the salesman," Roscoe said. "I go around and find work for us to do." "We're the helpers," said the Adams twins and Sylvia's little sister. "We run home and get Daddy's hammer." "Well, I'll be in charge of refreshments," said Mrs. Semicolon. "And so will I," said Mrs. Eager, who had come over to find Roscoe and had been standing on the stoop listening. "I think the Neighborhood Children's Club is such a wonderful idea. I'm going to make brownies for tomorrow's meeting." "And," said Mrs. Semicolon, "I'm going to scout around and see if I can find some furniture for the clubhouse. I've got an old kitchen table and 4 chairs up in the attic." "And, Mom, would you care if we had a fire in the fireplace on cold days?" Nicky asked. "If we put up a fire screen and we were very careful?" "I have an old grate they can have," said Mrs. Eager. Gotta help her. "And if they burn coal and use the fire screen, I think it would be quite safe, don't you, Carlotta?" "Oh, hush. Nick and I'll watch out for the little kids," said Jimmy earnestly. "After all, we're the oldest and the biggest." Well, the Neighborhood Children's Club grew and grew. Different mothers gave them furniture. They even had an old couch and some dishes and cookies, and apples and cider and peanuts and popcorn. Mrs. Semicolon built the boys a fine tool bench and gave them some of their older tools. Even Mr. Eager, who was a very good carpenter, controlled his terrible temper and came over and helped them to build a porch. The Adams twins' mother, who used to be an artist, painted them a beautiful sign with smiling little children holding up red letters that spelled out the Neighborhood Children's Club. Stop. The day they put up the sign, they invited Mrs. Pigglewiggle over for tea. Mrs. Semicolon had made a coconut cake, and Mrs. Eager brought over a big plate of fudge. Shh. There was a nice fire in the fireplace and pink and white check tablecloth on the old kitchen table. Are you trying to help me? Go get your bowl. Which Sylvia and Priscilla had painted pink. The only trouble was that the paint wasn't dry and the tablecloth stuck. In fact, they never could get it off, but certainly looked pretty that day. Hey, get your bowl. Trouble, trouble. Just before she went home, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle went in to see Mrs. Semicolon. Mrs. Semicolon said, "Oh, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, I'll never be able to thank you. Never." Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, "Don't thank me. Thank Mr. Piggle-Wiggle for leaving me that old sea chest full of magic cures for children. It was one of the finest things he ever did." "Oh, by the way," said Mrs. Semicolon, "I have quite a few leadership pills left. Let me get them for you." "Why don't you just keep them?" said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. "I have lots more, and with new children moving into the neighborhood and a clubhouse in your backyard, they might come in very handy." "Well, I have used them on 2 of the other older children. I mean, besides Nicky," said Mrs. Semicolon. "Oh, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, I'm very proud of Nicky. He's so patient and kind to the little children." "Of course he is," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. "Down inside, he probably always was. It's just that sometimes with children, especially boys, their bodies grow faster than their patience and kindness. All leadership pills do is even things up. Of course, having that wonderful clubhouse helps a lot. Busy children are happy children, and happy children are seldom quarrelsome." And Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle walked off down the street. I love Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. In the dusk, her dog Wag on one side, Lightfoot the cat on the other. Mrs. Semicolon wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron and said to nobody in particular, "There goes the most wonderful little person in the whole world." The next chapter is called The Whisperer. I'll see you on Monday, guys. Have a great weekend.